Nós estamos aqui em Devon, na Conferência Internacional Anual das Cidades em Transição, uma delegação brasileira. Viemos apresentar, estamos aqui com o grande inspirador do movimento das cidades em transição. E vamos pedir a ele para passar uma mensagem para o Brasil. So, Rob, in a country that there is no threat for resource depletion, there is so much water, potentially oil under very, very, very deep waters. What is the main message do you think you can send to the Brazilians, those who are already engaging into transition and those who are still awakening to the possibility? We don't have the same drivers than UK and than Europe. Our drivers are different. But what can you tell us so that we can continue persevering in time?
Well, I suppose in transition what we talk about is the concept of resilience and being able to adapt to any shocks, any changes that come along. And in the UK we focus particularly on peak oil and climate change, but in Brazil you have different challenges around climate change and around being part of a global economy which is in a very perilous condition and about to enter a major recession. So it's really looking at what are the things that threaten resilience in the Brazilian context at a local level and at a national level as well. And in transition we often get asked, what does transition look like in places that aren't Western English-speaking developed places, the US, the UK and so on. And what's really exciting seeing what's happening in Brazil is an idea that started here and it's really working how we had hoped it would, that people would pick it up and take it to very different places and try it out and see what works and adapt it and change it, because if you can't take a model that's designed for the UK and take it to Brazil, well, I have to change. And that's what's so exciting, seeing the work that you're doing is how that's taking place.
And maybe you want to flesh out this concept of resilience, because some of us know a lot, but Brazil don't know too much. Do you want to say a little bit, how does resilience translate into urban context, for instance?
Well, resilience is really the capacity of a community, of a society, to withstand shocks, not necessarily to stay exactly the same, but to change and adapt in a way that causes least pain, least damage to those within that group as different shocks hit. So, for example, when we were talking earlier, you said that in some Brazilian cities there are very high degrees of violence. And actually, as we see the impacts of climate change, of resource scarcity, of peak oil, that will, as Rob said, impact on the world economic situation, which will absolutely impact on the levels of difference in terms of how much money you have within Brazil. And we all know that the more unequal a society is, the less happy people are, the more crime there is, the less joy there is in that society. So maybe a key question around resilience for Brazil is that if you already have an unequal society, as the financial pressures get greater around the world, what can you do to become more resilient? And becoming more resilient has to mean becoming more equal. So that's a key question, I think, for transition in Brazil. You have people who don't have a large carbon footprint because they don't have enough money to have a large carbon footprint. So you are in a unique position to explore how do we make people more equal without increasing their carbon footprint, and that will be a long way to starting to say, how do we become more resilient?
I think also when we talk about resilience, it's that idea of how do you enable places to withstand shock from the outside. But in transition we take it beyond that and we say actually resilience isn't just the ability to not fall to bits when something terrible happens, it's actually a desired state. So that when you're looking at development in the Brazilian context, is the aim to develop like the US, like the US suburbia, or is actually the idea to develop in a way which is resilient and to put that idea of resilience really at the heart of where development is going, rather than just assuming that the world party will go on for a long time?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe building on that then, a question for people in Brazil is, what are the changes we need to make inside ourselves? If around the world so far the dominant pattern of development has been to acquire material goods, and actually what you already have in Brazil is probably far more solidarity amongst people than we often have here in Britain, where we have far more goods. How do you take this model and say, how do we reflect on ourselves in order to develop in a way which is resilient and sustainable for us? What changes do we make inside ourselves?
And I think as well, you know, we were talking there at lunch about the whole idea that transition should be fun and is something that's about reconnecting people who've lost those connections. And the book I was reading recently by Clive Hamilton called Requiem for a Species, and he says in there, it's not that economic growth makes us happy, it's because we're unhappy that the economy has to grow. It's our unhappiness that feeds that. So by reconnecting people and having a movement which is based on fun and reconnection, that I think that's there's something really very powerful politically there, I think.
Because of the disparity between rich and poor, then you go to violence and be very dangerous. So from dangerous to being dirty with the hands dirty, into building, you know, new communities and really harvesting this tradition of mutirão, this tradition of doing things together towards increasing the resilience in both ways. The way that you said, which is to, you know, to strengthen ourselves so that we can really be able to survive the changes, but also as a goal for development and strategy. I think this was really, really good. Thank you very much for bringing these seeds. And I trust that these new seeds, new thoughts will be planted in very fertile soil with our representatives here. And we're taking your message with great care back to Brazil. Thank you.